everybody. How are you? Hope you're doing really well and you're sitting comfortably and looking forward to this session. You know, I am, and I care. I hope you care too. Care about what? Well, care about where you live, the environment around you, the buildings you're in, the buildings you work in, and so on. We care about our environment now and in the future, don't we? And also about the IT that relates to it all. We care, in fact, about property technology and all its aspects. That's what this evening's webinar is about. And I'd like to introduce just a couple of people before we really get going. My name is Darwin. I am chairman of two great groups in the British Computer Society, and that is the Chartered Institute for IT in the UK. Groups are great, great in terms of number as well as anything else. We reach out to about 7,500 people, although I sincerely hope not all of them are on this webinar. We will have quite a few people because we have well over 100 people registered. So you'll be in good company, and I hope you're thinking about the topics, questions you would like to ask our great panelists. Our panelists are led by Kate Marshall and Paul Nebel, and they are both committee members, as am I, of the Central and North London branches of the BCS. Also, we have David Grund, who is the secretary of Central London branch. He is going to be our facilitator for the technicals. But the leaders of this session are Kate and Paul. So what I'd like to do is to hand you over to them, and let's look forward to our great session. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Darwin. And good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Nebel, and as Darwin said, I'm a British Computing Society committee member, and together with my colleague Kate, we have been organising a series of webinars about innovation in technology. My current role is as a fractional chief technology officer and executive coach, but in a previous existence, I was a senior engineer with Geovation, which is Ordnance Survey's Open Innovation Centre. And Geovation runs two accelerators, one on behalf of Ordnance Survey and one on behalf of HM Land Registry, which is represented this evening by Caroline Bray and Ibad Khureshi. And the PropTech accelerator, which is the one that we run on behalf of HM Land Registry, deals with all things connected with housing and property. And one of the reasons that we decided to run this particular webinar was because it seemed that there were quite a few people who didn't really know or hadn't even heard of PropTech and had no idea what it was and what it was about. So that's the reason that we're here this evening. And I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce them in just one moment. I have to unfortunately give apologies for Hugh, who was going to be one of our panelists, but due to a last-minute issue at work in the nature of startups, unfortunately, he can't be with us this evening. But I will go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves, and then Kate will take the first question. And what we hope to do this evening is to entertain and educate you, and hopefully interest you in the area of property technology or PropTech and the possibilities that it presents for the future. So in addition to Caroline and Ibad from HM Land Registry, we also have three representatives of startups. We have Sally Holdway from Teal Legal, we have Osim from RenKap, and we have Michael Wadsworth from adoor. And I will start by asking Caroline if you would please introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Pleased to meet you virtually. I'm Caroline Bray. I work for Land Registry, and why I'm on the session today is my role as a stakeholder manager for the PropTech side of the accelerator program that Paul spoke about earlier. Good to meet you all.
Thank you. Ibad, would you care to introduce yourself?
Hi there, my name is Ibad Khureshi. I am one of the lead data scientists at HM Land Registry, and as startups come on board with Geovation, I'm the person they engage with for more technical questions. And in a past life, I used to teach in academia and left that past behind me.
Thank you. Sally.
Hi, yes, I have a past life as well. I used to be a conveyancing solicitor. I did that for about 15 years or so, but for the last 4 years, I have been a co-founder of a PropTech startup called Teal Legal. And we are developing PropTech products to help people who are moving house in the conveyancing process, but also really interested in looking at actually, if we start to digitize property data, what the art of the possible might be there with new products and services.
Super, thank you. Michael.
Evening, everybody. My name's Michael. I'm the founder of adoor, and adoor is the home for your house move. So we're looking to connect everybody involved to track the progress of your house move from mortgage to moving in. And like Sally said, we're really interested in integrating property data and how that can be digitized. So yeah, great to meet you all today.
Thank you. Uka.
Hey, hi guys. Yeah, my name is Uka. So I work with one of the companies that was in Geovation as an accelerator. It's called RenKap. RenKap, currently we're working on site investigation. So what is site investigation? Is the sector of real estate when you're developing your site and you need early stage surveys being performed. So the platform we're working on houses this information and gets you qualified suppliers to actually carry out that work. In my role, I'm the tech lead and also do some back-end development. Yeah, as a software engineer.
Lovely, thank you. And finally, but by no means least, Kate.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, lovely to meet you guys. I've probably seen a few of you on the call before in our previous sessions that we've held as part of the innovation community initiatives that we run with the BCS, but I'll be your other host for this evening. So alongside Paul and Dalim and others on this call, I'm a member of the BCS committee. I lead the Innovation Hub community initiative alongside Paul, and this webinar on PropTech and all things about it is our latest in the series of webinars that we're hosting as part of this initiative. Since we're talking about past lives and current lives, I also work for IBM. I'm a developer and global technical ambassador lead for IBM Quantum. So if you have any questions on quantum computing, feel free to find me on LinkedIn and ask them. So I'm going to be kicking off the session this evening. So I'll just share my screen and then we can dive into the first questions that we can introduce the discussion with our panel. So if I share my screen and then make these slides full screen, this is just a prompt for myself and Paul, but also anyone who's joining late, they can see what the question is that we're discussing. So the first question of this evening will be a very broad one, and I'm sure one that will be key in enabling us for the rest of the session. So I'd like to ask our panel, what is PropTech to you guys and why is it important? So any first answers crying out for this one?
I'll go first if you like. So I think what PropTech is to me, it's the digitalization of things that need to happen in a property transaction, whether it's home buying and selling or looking after properties, managing properties. I think for me, it's about how you make things quicker and you do that in a technical way. So that's my view of PropTech. Thanks for that, Caroline.
Yeah, I'll go next. Yeah, following on that. Yeah, like PropTech to me is just that intersection between it's like all the other fields that have technology integrated into it. It's just that intersection where real estate meets technology. So this can be applied in any shape or form, from renting to actually site maps from a satellite. So just all that intersection to real estate. That's where like PropTech exists.
Thanks for that, Uka. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'd echo what's been said already, but also just to mention what an incredibly important industry the property industry is to the UK. You know, there's the HML guys will give me the exact figure, I'm sure, but you know, in excess of 1 million transactions a year in the home buying and selling market. And as having come from a legal background, we're still having to work to protocols which were written 30 or 40 years ago, whilst consumers still clearly have expectations that actually they should be able to go through that process in a more modern way. So PropTech really absolutely for us is at the intersection of those two things. It's how can we bring the existing processes into the 21st century and make them a bit more consumer friendly, so everyone has a smoother transaction experience.
I think just adding to Sally's point, I think it is about the consumer as well, and how they interact with the data as well as the process. I think PropTech for us is about giving awareness and clarity and transparency to the consumer about the process and what they're going through, and where their data is ultimately being shared. And I think PropTech for many of us is about property transactions. It's about people buying and selling homes. But I think as well as that, within PropTech, unfortunately Hugh's not here, but there is sort of land tech as well, in terms of looking for land and data around the land and the property, the buildings and physical buildings around us. There was also a startup on our accelerator who were looking at mapping areas about routes around buildings, the most efficient routes, room mapping, and also it was like the actual physical building maintenance as well. I think there's the physical building sort of structures is sort of a part of PropTech as well. Yeah.
No,
I should
perfect.
chip in my 2 cents here as well. I think what's really driving PropTech now is the whole concept of data-driven technologies. And at Land Registry, we're striving to make more and more data available to the public, and we're always striving to put out new data products. And we are being driven by the startup industry in terms of prioritizing what needs to come out. So Land Registry is celebrating its 160th birthday this month, and these are old processes that are coming into the current century, and it'll be driven by the PropTech industry, where we link user expectations with the processes of old.
No, thank you for those thoughts. It seems definitely to me like an area that should be prevalent in pretty much every single one of our lives, but something that only I became aware of recently. So on to our next question. Paul?
Yes, thank you. So one of the things that I became aware of when we were planning this particular webinar was the lack of awareness of what PropTech is. And the fact that it even exists as an industry. Now, because of my previous association, it makes complete sense to me. I'm very well aware of what goes on in the PropTech space, but a lot of my colleagues and people I speak to are not so aware. So would you agree that PropTech as a term and as a concept is relatively unknown? And if so, what can we do to promote it, to make people more aware of what it is, what it does, how it helps people, and why they should be involved?
So I'll go. So I'll give you my sort of experience. So back in 2017 is when Land Registry partnered with Geovation to do the PropTech Stream of the Accelerator program. And if I'm perfectly honest, so I was given that role, and I was given that role to manage the contract and work with all the startups. And probably at that stage, I didn't probably know what PropTech was. I mean, I knew what property transactions were. I'd worked in solicitors. I knew about home buying and selling, but actually what PropTech, I probably didn't really totally understand the term of PropTech. So I had to learn pretty quickly. But I think now it's becoming much more well known, certainly within the land and property industry. And from a Land Registry point of view, we can share it afterwards, but our latest strategy 22 talks a lot about PropTech. It talks a lot about Geovation, and it talks a lot about finding new uses for data and services, and using Geovation itself to do that. So I think PropTech is well known within the land and property industry, but I don't think it's probably well known outside of it.
So Caroline, I'm going to credit you then with inventing the definition of PropTech. Mind you were at least 2 years ahead of certainly we were. So thank you for that.
I think I'm going to credit the Sade Business School, because they did a big, I don't know if you remember, Paul, they did their big paper on the future of PropTech, and I worked with them on it. So I think that sort of increased my knowledge quite a lot. So I became someone who knew a little bit more about it than I did probably 6 months before.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'd certainly agree with you, Caroline, though. I think probably certainly within the, you know, the conveyancing sector, PropTech is and law tech as well, I suppose, but PropTech more so is a phrase which I think is getting more recognition. Perhaps from a consumer point of view, you know, I think I would agree that it's probably relatively unknown, because we don't have as many touch points, do we? You know, with open banking and banking apps, people possibly have heard about fintech or insurtech because it's something that you come across more often. But, you know, you on average move house every 7 years. So it's not something that necessarily you would encounter as a consumer. Having said that, some of the super interesting startups which are going through the Geovation program are coming up with all sorts of really new, great, interesting ideas, which possibly I think will change that, won't they? You know, all the stuff that's going on with property logbooks, which are going to help you manage your house as you move forwards, and, you know, all your connected devices and that kind of stuff. I think possibly we'll see a change in how widely the term PropTech is becomes common to consumers as well as the industry.
I said, I was gonna just add in that I think like everyone has actually used some sort of PropTech application. If you've used like Airbnb or bookings.com, because all of them, I know these guys are like the higher ups of a PropTech technology, because they kind of commercialized a lot of renting of houses. But there's an article by Savills where it talked about the global worth of a real estate in the world, which is 326 trillion, and they added up all of the big techs in the world, including the Airbnbs, and they're actually only 4% of the global worth of real estate in the world. So, and with cloud technology being like the biggest kind of driver for startups to actually come into play, PropTech in certain areas now can actually be used to kind of add value to the country that the startup is in. And also, for example, the company I'm working in now, RenKap, the site investigation application, using cloud, you can actually move this technology into Europe, into America, and kind of capture more of the market. And also with that, with cloud being the forefront, you can actually grow the platform quicker and make PropTech more known in certain areas that like they wouldn't really consider using it.
Just one quick thing to add, I think. So as citizens, I think you don't, like Uka says, you don't necessarily realise you're using PropTech. A good example of that is Paul Thirdfort, who came through the Geovation PropTech Accelerator Programme, and they do ID checks and anti-money laundering checks. And actually, I recently sold my mum's house, and the solicitor I used actually used Thirdfort to do all those checks. So you use it when you don't really necessarily know it's PropTech. I think that's quite interesting as well.
And I think adding to Caroline's point there, and Uka as well, I think because especially if we look at what we're working on, the property transaction process, there are so many sub-industries within that, like Sally said, there's law tech or legal tech, as well as I think PropTech maybe covers a much broader part of the industry. It's quite a broad topic. We are seeing these sort of fragments of law tech and land tech and even place tech, where they are sort of niching out into these smaller segments. And then I think, like Caroline said, Thirdfort, fantastic company. We partner with them. They're sort of even within the ID world, so they sort of blend into fintech. And I think that's where PropTech, you could even consider people like Zoopla, Rightmove on the market. They are technology companies and they are in the property space. You could potentially consider them, but because of it being considered real estate or house moving, that sort of maybe even, I think people, like Caroline said, and so I said, you might not even know that you're using some PropTech. And I think that's almost, in terms of like promoting it, I think it's about sort of driving an awareness. I almost don't even think that PropTech even needs to be the word that people use to relate to. I think it's about the technology and actually helping the people and the communication around that. I think it's about how people use the software to help people, or hardware if it becomes hardware, how you use that to help people and what the solution drives, I think is the more important piece. But having a name to live under definitely helps. If you say, oh, we're in PropTech, then everyone's like, oh, great, yeah, I know those guys, they're cool. Like, yeah, let's do that.
And that means you can apply to the accelerator, Michael, which you did and got on. So it does have its uses.
I have the badge, I've got the t-shirt, and I would highly recommend, I don't get any commission, but I would highly recommend people go to Geovation, even just as free members. I think there's such a wealth to take from it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Michael, and thank you for that. And I appreciate that this is a London-centric view, so I apologise, but the reason that what I'm about to say is with respect to promotion. Anyone who's travelled on the tube in the last, I'd say probably last year, will have seen an explosion in the adverts that sit in those little cards above the window, which have been almost taken over by people, you know, offering various property services in all sorts of forms, be they financial, legal, just general moving, whatever. You know, I certainly have definitely noticed a big uptake in promotion of businesses in this area. And incidentally, sorry, something I forgot to say at the beginning, is I've noticed a couple of people have raised their hands. By all means, please do ask questions. We're going to put aside some time at the end, hopefully, if we have time, to address some of your questions. But we won't actually take questions during the webinar because it somewhat disrupts the flow of it. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. So yes, I think, Kate, we can move on to our next question, potentially.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. It was a really insightful discussion there. I hadn't actually realised that I had interacted with PropTech before. So thanks for enlightening me that there, guys. I can see there's already a couple of questions on the Q&A, but as Paul mentioned, if you do have something you'd like to share, pop it in the Q&A section and we will come around to that at the end. So the next point of discussion is that you could say there are only 5 things you can do with property, and those 5 things can be distilled down to build it, knock it down, buy it, sell it, or manage it. But doesn't this mean that there's not much PropTech can do? I'm obviously provoking everyone to disagree with me.
So, I mean, yeah.
Just get the stick and...
I'll start off by saying, I mean, that's a very reductive way of looking at the property market, because each of those is an incredibly complex process with a lot of actors, a lot of authorities, a lot of systems, and a lot of development over the last, not decades, but centuries of practices that need to be updated and need to meet the needs of the public, which at the moment there's a lot of holes in the buying process. There's a lot of manual interventions, and PropTech can fit into multiple places along these 5 chains.
Oh, nicely put, Ibad. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this one?
I think one thing that from a land registry point of view and other data providers, the data we provide can help PropTech and help things go more smoothly. So help build solutions that make things go smoother. So like, for instance, the home buy, like Sally mentioned, property logbooks and things like that, the data from property logbooks, upfront information. So when someone goes to buy a property, they know all the things that are right or wrong with it in the beginning, and that would all be fed through data. And so that means that further down the line, they don't find something out that means they're going to decide not to buy that property and therefore wasted lots of information. So there's lots going on about upfront information, property logbooks, and all those will be fed with data from Land Registry and from other providers as well that will help the end consumer decide whether they should buy or not buy a property, or build or not build a property. And there's so much more that data can do to help PropTech as well.
Yeah, I said, yeah, for example, like when we're talking about like building it, so like to build it, you would need to investigate your site. You would need people to like planning permission. There's a lot of like each of these bullet points. Like there's a lot of subsections that are on it. It's like a web for one of these sections to be completed. So like these bullet points to me are just placeholders for multiple business opportunities, and also like areas to actually help the PropTech sector to actually grow, because like I believe like it's in infancy at the moment. So because there's not like the technology we have now, a lot of it, like we see the advancements in like communication and social media, and like PropTech is still like the technology inside it is not as advanced yet, or hasn't reached particular levels yet. So this is where like a lot of businesses or ideas can come in and actually build this these parts up in PropTech.
I'd completely second that, you know, and the little bit that we're involved in out of those 5 is probably the sell it and a bit on the buy it, and just the tiny bit of the jigsaw we've got with, there's around about 1,000 data points that we're working with. So each of those sections is massive by itself, right? But I think I'd also push back and argue that there's loads of other things that you can do with property as well, right? So, you know, you can extend it, you can decorate it, you can, you know, as Uka said, you can Airbnb it. There's lots of really super interesting companies looking from a blockchain point of view about tokenizing it, you know, and what all that's going to mean moving forward. So, but all of that obviously is predicated on us building those digital foundations, which mean that we can extract that property data in a machine readable format and start to do interesting things with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to that point, Sally, I think Fine and Country are, I think, the first estate agent in the country have set up like an NFT, an online world estate agency that you can start to list property space. I saw Nike or somebody spent a ridiculous amount of money on a large piece of land in the NFT world. And yeah, and I think the renovation point's a really good one. I think using those data points that you can get from upfront information, it can give you insights as to the potential uplift in a property value. I know there are a few companies that are either in Geovation or near it, looking at how you can they're looking at like recent planning applications to then give you an insight as to what you could do, even with what's it called, where you don't have to apply for planning permission. You can someone will correct me. Yeah, permitted development. Yeah. I had the words just not in the right order.
Yes, like, said the boring lawyer.
Yeah. They're looking at that, where they can give you, for sort of like £100, they can tell you like, this is what's been permitted in your area before, and I think things like that really, on top of like, we're in a similar world to you, Sally, with the buying and selling process. But even there's companies like Vea who are like pulling data from the Land Registry title deeds and sort of giving those insights to prevent. It's really to give you that upfront information that you are making the sort of the purchase that you're expecting to make, and if like land is unregistered or if there are other things, then it sort of reduces those fall throughs. So it's not just like property as a building or an asset, but it's also efficiency within the processes that we're all doing as well. Like we hope with adoor that we can reduce the time to complete a transaction, and I think we're all looking to find those efficiencies, cost savings and opportunities, and I think that's the bit on top of that PropTech can add as well.
And I think, I mean, it's so exciting, the stuff that you're working on, Michael, and, some of the other companies you've just mentioned there, because, this isn't a serious problem. We're now at a point where it's taking on average 5 months from the point of making an offer to getting the keys. Because for various reasons, but one of which we're not leveraging technology to the level we should be. But what Michael's talking about there is not only fixing that as a problem, but actually, to Caroline's point, we then add on all the really cool stuff, don't we? That actually, when you go and look at a property, you can make that really informed, transparent decision. And before you put the offer in, whether you can put the extension on the side of the house or the loft conversion or whatever it might be, which starts to bring it much more to life and what can be, I think, be perceived as a bit of a dry process otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also people like Matterport as well, where they're doing like mapping of spaces and things like that, where you can then, it's not just about the physical property, it's about visually, especially if you were like looking at a co-working space or if you were looking to buy a property, there's services within that as well.
That's lovely, because especially on the point that you just raised, Sally, that leads me very nicely, and thank you for that, into the next question, which if there's one thing that I've learnt from you guys about the PropTech industry, it's that not exactly exclusively, but it very definitely seems that both the legal and the construction professions, for various perfectly good reasons, are notoriously technology averse. Now, that's not to say that everyone in those professions are technology averse, but as a whole, I think you would hopefully agree with me that that's the case. So the question then is, what issues does this present, and what can we do to change it to enable Adoor and Teal Legal and RenKap and all the others out there to actually make this work more smoothly?
Yeah, I can shed some light on this. Like in RenKap, my time here, like I've noticed with the product we had with site investigation, the uptake from local local housing committees and also private associations to use the technology is like they're quite how do I say it? They didn't want to trust a startup yet. That's I think that's kind of the a break point, and that is that initial convincing of like the bigger players in the industry kind of convinces the smaller companies or contractors to actually use the technology, because I believe like once a company is like known or is backed by, for example, the government, they're more trusted. So I think PropTech technologies that are coming into the market will face this initially, and once they've kind of made your way in the market, then the uptake on the technology becomes more rapid, or people give it more of a try. But I think it's that it's still a startup. Companies that have been around for like 30 years mightn't trust it as much. That's what I've noticed we're facing the industry.
I think taking from Luca's point about this is Forbes had a recent article about in the next decade we'll see the largest transfer of generational wealth from baby boomers down to Generation X and millennials. So I think the market is going to shift. People's expectations are going to shift. The culture within the law firms and construction firms will also shift. It's going to be slow and it's going to trickle, but I think that will come about, and it's better to be at this stage getting things right, getting the procedures and processes right. I mean, as much as people still write articles about how millennials are destroying industry, you have to realize that Generation Z is now 23 years old. They're entering the job market. So when the government's talking about young people for more properties, they're talking about younger millennials and Generation Z as they're coming in, and not older millennials or Gen Xers who who, either are already on the property ladder or are in some way getting on it. So
that's an interesting point.
I think I would say I'm really optimistic that this is a situation which is changing, particularly in the legal sector. I mean, having sat on the other side of the desk as a practicing solicitor, 100% I absolutely agree with the sentiment of the question here. And I think it's tricky, right? Because, you know, lawyers carry a lot of risk. You know, they have really expensive professional indemnity insurance policies. And if they deviate from one process to another one, they need to have absolute confidence that that's not going to increase their exposure to risk, and that they're still going to be making sure they're, you know, dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, as we like to do for their clients. But there's so much more, I think, support for the legal industry, certainly over the last 5 years or so, that we're seeing. And Geovation is a real prime example of that, and all the really great thought leadership that's coming out of Land Registry for the general profession. I think I would say we're seeing similar things coming from the Law Society and the other regulators, the Council of Licensed Conveyancers, and then government initiatives as well, like LawTech UK have got some really great resources available, not just for the legal profession, but I think also for startups looking to start to develop products for the PropTech sector. Because again, I think on the opposite side of the fence, if you don't necessarily come from within the industry, it can be a little bit of a maze to try and navigate through all the regulatory requirements. But certainly when we started out on this journey, it was quite difficult to start to navigate that. Whereas I think we would say we're seeing a lot more direction coming from the regulators and the government bodies to help organisations through that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
sorry.
Go on, Caroline.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think to add to that, our latest strategy, it talks about working with partners and stakeholders to help the whole profession speed up and improve. So it talks about the Law Society and UK Finance. So the strategy itself, from a Land Registry point of view, is all about working with partners, working with people who can help smooth out the process of the home buying and selling and process, and just make it easier for everyone to do and more efficient.
I think the piece I was going to add, I know the dreaded C word, but I think with COVID, I think especially within the transaction process, I think it really did force agents and conveyancers to accelerate technology adoption, and they had to go from maybe a lot of their stuff being done in person, wet signatures, like you're seeing e-signatures being adopted far more rapidly than potentially before. I think COVID, unfortunately, as a positive, did push technology adoption in this sector specifically. I think the point one of the guys made earlier is there are younger generations coming into leadership positions in firms that have been brought up with technology that will also accelerate that. We've definitely seen, speaking to those sort of people in firms, we've seen a greater success where they are around technology and have been brought up with it. There's definitely been a success there, but I think also people find efficiencies. If you can put numbers to things, I think that's how we've found success. If you can say with confidence and with data to say we can save you X amount of hours, or this drills down to this value, I think that's been, and that was to like Uka's point, we're a startup, we have to show our value, we have to prove our value, and I think the numbers and the data points really help with that.
Oh, thank you guys for that really insightful discussion. I'd like to move us on to the next question, because I want to make sure that we have enough time to cover them all. But this one I think will be of interest to a lot of the audience, especially myself. When I was reading the questions in advance, I was really interested to know how PropTech could sort of touch on the housing or the social issues around the housing crisis and different things around there. So yeah, I guess housing is one of the main social issues for the UK government, and I'd like to know, how is PropTech working with the government to address this issue? No one
I mean, I can start on this if you want. So again, our strategy talks about PropTech, and it talks about the housing and UK government, and I think the fact that Land Registry is part of government, we engage with PropTech through Geovation, and PropTech has a voice in the land registry. So I think from that point of view, they do start to help it, and they start to influence it. And some of the companies we've already had on, like RenKap, that they help find sites to build houses. A lot of the companies we've brought onto the accelerator program are doing exactly that, which is trying to help the housing issue we have at the moment. So I think the Geovation program, the PropTech side of it, and the geotech location side of it tries to help, and Ordnance Survey and land registry part of government, and Ordnance Survey are linked to government as well.
I think building on from that, like, you can't just say, oh, there's an empty piece of land here and let's build on it. And it's extremely expensive to start those projects. So the PropTech industry is really helping developers by actively finding suitable land for development as part of their product offerings. If you're a developer and you subscribe to these PropTechs, you might actually get a hit list beforehand that's had a lot of pre-checks to it. And one of the other things that, I mean, it's slightly tangential here, but Paul and I were in a meeting recently where people were disrupting the ownership model of property ownership. And I don't want to give away what that company does, etc., because I don't know how much of that was sensitive, but I found that to be really, really fascinating. And I think a lot of good things will come out of it from there.
Yeah. What's out? Like I said, I was gonna add in there. Like a RenKap, yeah, we started, like, we've been working with some local authorities, and like one of our like current clients, the GLA, yeah, Greater London Authority. We're working with them to kind of unlock, land, unutilized land, for smaller contractors to like start building homes. And like this is kind of how we're tying it into like what we're like offering with the site investigation to kind of accelerate that shortage of homes. Like, let's build more, and that's where like the PropTech part of it can actually benefit the community that it belongs to.
Yeah, and I think coming at it from a slightly different angle, there's lots of really interesting startups out there, aren't there, which are looking to collaborate, you know, so startups who are looking in to support people who are renting properties to then be using evidence of their rental to help support mortgage applications so they can transition to home ownership in due course, because that's clearly a huge barrier at the moment to get on the property ladder in the first place from a purchase point of view. And I think certainly sharing those digitized data lakes is something which, you know, I think across the various property verticals, we're starting to see it a lot more in the conversations we're having, so that you can then really support people moving from, you know, from one property to another and a different type of property ownership.
That's great.
Just to add quickly, Sally, the home buying and selling group, that's the members of that are full of like PropTech founders, aren't they? And that's working, we're working to government really, and we'll report into government its findings. So I think that's another good way that PropTech is working with government to try and help all things property.
Absolutely, and I think that's also across the wider industry as well. You know, that there's all sorts of really big or existing property companies, whether it's from the conveyancing world or the estate agents world or whichever, who are all working in those collaborative ways now, which again is something that we've really seen increase over the last 4 or 5 years or so. You know, which again gives us a lot of optimism that some of these big problems, hopefully technology can certainly do some of the heavy lifting to help sort.
I think one of the other benefits as well is that because there is technology sharing data across platforms, it means that it is much easier, like you say, Sally, to share financial information and get a better picture of a potential borrower or a potential property, so that you are more informed regardless of whatever position you are in the process. And I think there are also people like Crisis, the homeless charity. They have their own venture studio looking to invest in, I know they're not really government, but they are sort of looking at trying to help people transition out of homelessness and looking at startups in that sector. And yeah, I think within PropTech, I think we've already covered it, like using technology to find spaces, and people like Searchland. Unfortunately, Hugh's not here to talk about that, but I'll give him a little shout out as well. But again, you can reduce the cost to actually acquire land, which then means you don't have to be looking to sell property at a higher price because of the profit you need to make. It then helps drive efficiency, and I think government have recently shared their strategy for the DLUC as well, which sort of incorporates some of what Caroline was saying as well.
I think it's also useful to say that I've come across in the past at Geovation businesses nominally in the PropTech sector who've been working for people who don't have property. And Caroline, I'm sure you can remind me, I can't remember the name of the company that was set up to provide postal addresses for homeless people.
Yeah, it was on the
It's on Geotech, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the name has slipped me at the moment, but I know exactly what you mean. But proxy address.
That's it, proxy address.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've been talking about houses, and the implication therefore is home ownership, business ownership, rental, etc. But there are people who don't have houses, and proxy address is a good example of helping to get people who otherwise wouldn't be able to receive, for example, wouldn't be able to apply for a job because they wouldn't be able to receive, to prove that they have a place of address, various benefits and things like that, and leads into the final question before we look at some of the questions that have been invited by the audience, which is to say, what is the future for PropTech? You know, we've been discussing this and suggesting that where we are now, to a certain extent, is at the beginning. And as it grows and becomes more integrated and more data becomes available, the premise is that it will get bigger and better and help us in ways we never thought of before. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on what those ways might be and where property and property technology might be taking us in the world that we live in at the moment.
Yeah, I said, yeah, like one thing I noticed in the PropTech industry that is kind of lacking is like open source. I know that's like it's not profitable for businesses, but what will actually push PropTech in the future is have some open source data that is like in general required by most PropTechs. For example, addresses, land information. The government could make this more available to businesses that are as APIs. This will actually accelerate a lot of work. So it's not kind of held by certain companies, and and this, because this information is not available, it's harder to utilize it in existing technology, and cloud services is everywhere. So if this is available, it'll accelerate new applications coming online, like in PropTech, and that will actually boost the uptake of new companies coming in.
I'll have to slightly disagree with the premise of what you said there. If it is data generated by companies or owned by companies, there's nothing the government or any of its agencies can do to open that. Our own data is, by virtue of us being a public body, is public. It might be behind a slight paywall, but it is still publicly accessible. But stuff that comes out of the open source is good enough, but it has to come from within the PropTech industry. Land Registry can't facilitate it further.
I think the slight issue with open source data as well is, and Sally will probably be thinking this as well, is sort of where it comes from and proving its provenance. Is that if you have open source data, it's then about how you create reliability around that. I think that's the difficulty in open source. I think you make a good point about accessibility, and the APIs are already there from the gateway and through HMLR. So it's just about sort of continuing to incrementally evolve those to make them more easily accessible. But I think a lot of the government data is accessible, and I think it's fairly easy to operate. I think you are right. If you're looking at maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, you can look at like no code solutions for things like this. But I think I think there's the data is there, and I think the government's done a good job with the APIs they have created to tap into that. And they obviously need to make they need to charge. It needs to it can't be free, unfortunately. But I think for me the sort of on the future for PropTech is, I think it will splinter out. I think you will see the terms of place tech, PropTech almost might sort of fade, and you might see different sectors of like legal and law tech and place tech and land tech, geotech. They're all going to all rise. They're all going to become more prevalent, and more as people see that they have legs on their own. They're going to be closer to those more specific sectors, rather than, I think PropTech is very good because there are lots of niches that you can draw together, and everyone's sort of relevant to each other. And I think that's where I see, but I still see PropTech as an industry. It will be further collaboration and integration. I think you'll find that the different sectors within it, whether you're managing a property and your sort of ongoing sort of maintenance or refurbishments or renovations, right the way through to like sales and purchase, you'll have I think data will start becoming evergreen, that you'll have these logbooks, you'll be able to have this almost passport, homeowner's passport maybe, of taking that data and taking that with you, and or that staying with the property. And I think the data will become more accessible, and there'll be people doing so many more interesting things with it over time.
I agree with you. Sorry, Caroline.
Go on, you go.
I was just going to, well, unsurprisingly, Michael, completely agree with you. We get together once a week on a working group, Michael and I do, and we're head scratching on some of these issues, really, because PropTech, I think, is still quite nascent, really, and 100%, the reason that we rock up with that every week is because we're huge advocates of open source and being able to easily share data, in a fair format across the various verticals. But challenges do come with it, which we need to think about seriously, because they underpin really important transactions, the biggest transaction in most people's lives. So we need to have trust frameworks that sit around that. And it's dead easy, when we're getting title deed information from you guys at HM Registry, because you're pretty well trusted within the industry, I would say. But then when we get into like commercial startups like us, how can people trust the information that we're pulling together? So thinking about the difference between those primary sources of data versus data aggregators, and then whoever then relies on that data, how do they know where that's come from? So I think, to reassure everyone, there's a lot of thought and work that's going on across the industry on that piece. And I think the reason that we're always so keen to collaborate in those discussions and that dialogue is really underpins this question: what is the future for PropTech? And we always talk about it in our little kind of conveyancing world as a 3-stage process. We talk about conveyancing in the concept of data, decision, deal. That's basically what conveyancers are doing today in an analog world, if you like. They're gathering together a lot of information about a property, and then once they have it, they're making some decisions about, from a legal point of view, whether it's good and marketable, and they go through the due diligence process. And if they can tick that box, they can then proceed to do the deal, and everyone is very happy because they get the keys and move in and get the new sofa. But underpinning all of that, the foundation is the digitized data. So I think that's kind of where we're at the moment. We see further down the line that technology is then going to start to have a real big impact on the decisioning process, and also to be underpinning the deal as well. So that's what we see as possibly areas to look at over the next 2 to 3 years.
So all I was going to just add quickly is, again, in our strategy, we talk about releasing data, and we talk about using the FAIR principles, and we also talk about releasing data as long as it's safe to do so. So not compromising anyone's data and not compromising information. But Uka, we haven't met yet. So when we're in Geovation, we can have a chat about what data you may be able to get that you haven't got your hands on yet from Land Registry.
Yeah. Lovely.
I'll just add here, because we've talked about fair and Caroline's brought it up. We have a major piece of work around making our data fair. And I think by virtue of my answer, I'll answer Stephen's question that's in there around data security and spreading data around. As I mentioned earlier, our data to some extent is public. We are a public organization. Our data is anyone can go and get their neighbor's title deed by paying £3 to Land Registry. The only difference in the last decade is you can now get it digitally as well through an API, but you can still also just get the paper one in the post. So obviously, without going into specifics, we are always evolving our strategies on fraud detection and counter fraud, and obviously I will not go into those specifics, but that's why we're working closely with PropTech, is to see where the PropTech market is going to identify these sorts of routes. And our objective here is to simplify for the home buyers by consolidating data from local authorities, which is also public. That's another major program that we have, and making it such that there's a clear, concise vocabulary that meets the FAIR principles to allow PropTech to leverage our data, while ourselves keeping a control of the process of buying and selling to ensure, I mean, things happen, but trying to minimize the risk of fraud and title deed shifting without proper authentication or validation. So,
nice.
No, thank you so much for also tying in an answer there to one of the questions on the panel there, Ibad. That's leads us nicely on to trying to close off some of the other questions that are in the panel that I'll try, if we can get sort of one or two inputs to these, we can maybe get through most of them. So Enrico's posted to say 3 years ago, our team investigated PropTech adaptation from the US, UK, Asia, and the Middle East. We know that Oxford Side School has published a study on this regard, and we saw that Compass in the US is far off than REA and Purple Bricks. This is partly because of the more mature MLS, about 600 independent databases in the US that third-party providers and the NRA. I'm hoping that these acronyms mean more to you guys than they do to me. But how important is a mature listing database for the PropTech industry to move forward? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, yeah, this is like the thing that we just like kind of talked about on like, yeah, the data sources that we have, over time is going to increase, of course, but in the UK, like, yeah, we don't have that many, but depending which let's say area you're in, because let's say if it's about like a property and a listing, yeah, those are growing slowly, but like the let's say you're working on site and brownfield land, like there's not many of that around, like in the UK compared to, like, for example, the 600 there in the US. I think that's what that fellow was talking about. So as time goes on in the UK, I believe, like, yeah, such databases will exist as well, and yeah, just accelerate the PropTech sector for those data where those data will help in.
Thank you, Kat, for answering that one. I think we've probably got time for one more. So, for example, we have one question from Minal. How does the very recent property market impact PropTech's speed of growth?
I presume you're talking there about the very immediate recent PropTech market, with over half the mortgage products that were available a week ago no longer being available, having been withdrawn due to economic turbulence.
So I don't really understand the question, if I'm honest, and I'm not really sure that it will stop PropTech speed of growth. This is just something that's happening at the moment. I don't necessarily think it will, but I might have misunderstood the question or not. Maybe not the right person to answer it.
I think I'll give a more, my view of what I'm seeing is that over the last 14 years, so i.e. after the 2008 recession, a lot of generational farms and land is being sectioned off to raise capital. So new properties are being developed on old farms across the country. All these new bills are coming up on these old farms. So there's a lot of scope for PropTech to work with people who are trying to generate capital and work with developers to match them. And I think it is primarily one of the reasons that Land Registry is under pressure at this point, is because these are titles that may have not changed hands in 50 years, that are suddenly needing full geospatial inspections and us going in there and creating new titles for new properties. And PropTech we're already seeing it accelerate the process of this development. And it's only going to, I feel, as I mentioned before about the transfer of generational wealth, I think it's going to accelerate even more as you go further.
I think just very quickly to add to that, I think we see that it really doesn't matter whether it's a hard market or a soft market really, but PropTech still absolutely has a place. You know, if the professionals within industry are super busy, then they need to be able to rely on technology to do that heavy lifting for them and allow them to get through that increase in transactions. But likewise, if the transaction volumes go down, you know, leveraging those big data lakes and those big data insights, for instance, for mortgage lenders, so they've just got much more granular visibility of their exposure to risk with regards to the properties that they're lending on, then there's a space for PropTech there. So I think we see that it cuts both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Sally. I think that's all we're going to have time for today. Apologies to Tom, we didn't get around to your point now to talk about one of the tools that you've been using before. So apologies we didn't reach that one, but thank you so much for all of the inputs, guys. I've learned so much in the last hour. I'm sure that many of the audience has too, especially with the keen amount of involvement on the Q&A as well. So thank you guys for being a very interactive audience as well. Paul, is there anything else you want to say before we close out?
Only to say once again, thank you to our panelists for taking the time to speak with us and promote such an interesting discussion. And I hope that anyone who's watching this who has any kind of interest in PropTech or wants to know more about it. So we've mentioned Geovation and HMLR's accelerator a number of times. That's a good place to start. And I hope you do so and become involved in what is a very interesting, exciting and growing sector.
Absolutely. I can see that Michael isn't able to unmute himself, but
yeah.
He also mentions that he'd be happy to chat to anyone that's interested if you wanted to reach out to him. So yeah, huge thank you to all of the panelists. If there's any final comments, we can just...
I'd just like to echo what Paul said. If anyone, it's not just about the accelerator program in Geovation. You become members for free. So if you do that, you can sign up and become a member of our community. Happy to chat to you. Happy to chat to you even if you don't do that. But it's a really great community, probably like yours, probably smaller than your community, but it's a great place to start learning about PropTech. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone. That was great. Hey.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Must say, yeah. At RenKap, yeah, we're experiencing exciting times at the moment. So yeah, if anyone wants to have a chat, yeah, you can to go ahead and check us out on LinkedIn, or just you can chat to me. But yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Likewise, I'd echo that sentiment as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys, and yeah, see you for the next one.
Cheers.
See you then.
Night, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Good evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.